All right, welcome. I've got a very special guest with me today. I've got Carol Yang, who's the contributor chapter to this wonderful book, which we'll be talking about in a minute. Now, Carol is an executive coach, so I'll hand over to you, Carol, to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Ross, and thank you so much for inviting me to be here with you. I'm really excited about our chat. I am a leadership development professional. Most of my work is in executive coaching, and I work primarily with leaders to help them successfully transition into bigger or more senior roles. Something which I'm very familiar with because prior to being an executive coach, I was formerly a global vice president in a very large Fortune 500 organization. And I can speak a little bit about that later on, if that would be helpful.
Wonderful. Well, firstly, congratulations on being featured in Leadership Unscripted. So, what drew you to contribute to the anthology, and how does your chapter really fit within the broader context for women who lead?
Well, let me give you a little bit of background. You mentioned it's an anthology, and that's absolutely correct. Leadership Unscripted is a book where we have a combination of, I think there are 12 of us, each of us who have contributed a chapter. And what we wanted to do was to really share our own leadership journey, what we learned from it, what were our defining moments, and use that as an opportunity to provide some inspiration to leaders around the world, but particularly to female leaders, and help them understand that there is no one way to lead, and there is no one way to have a very fulfilling and rewarding life and career. And when you read the individual chapters in the book, you'll see that so clearly. I mean, what I love is the fact that we all started at different points in different ways. All of us are in different functions. We all took different paths, but we all kind of landed in the same place, which is, you know, finding a life and a career that is tremendously rewarding and fulfilling for each of us.
Hmm. And look, you came from being a global vice president in the Fortune 500 to launching your company, which is called Spring Forward Australia. So, what was the turning point that really prompted your decision to step away from corporate life?
I would say it was more than one turning point. um, One thing, when you read the book, you read that I love lighthouses. And the lighthouse has a particularly strong meaning for me. And lighthouses are often in locations where it's very treacherous. And so I see a lighthouse as a symbol of resilience and hope because it helps guide sailors safely to the harbor. And whenever I see a lighthouse, I think of this almost like a North Star, so to speak. And so I look at my lighthouse as my personal North Star. And so, I'm answering your question in a very long way, but what's really important to me is to be able to live a life that's authentic to who I am and what matters most to me. And so what led me to pivot away from a corporate career was as a result of several defining moments in my life. Defining moments where I made decisions based on what kind of corporate career I wanted to have. So I first made a decision, and it was a defining moment when I decided that I didn't want to stay on the GM path, the general management path. I really wanted to stay focused as a marketing professional at that point in time. So basically become a CMO instead of a CEO. And I explained a little bit why that was the case in the book. And then I think the big defining moment that caused the pivot was when I was in a personal development program. And it was the first time I had ever attended a program where they ask questions like, what is it that we really want in life? What is some of the baggage we're carrying that's holding us back? And I'm sitting there going, whoa, never really thought about that. But what was interesting was I was also a team leader for this little subgroup, and we were all working on our individual little goals. And And at the end of the whole program, which was several months, certain individuals were being recognized for their contribution. And I was recognized as somebody who really contributed to my team in helping them achieve their goals. And I remember at that ceremony, I had tears streaming down my eyes. They had picked a song that symbolized how each of us showed up during the program. And the song they picked for me was Because You Loved Me by Celine Dion. And even now, when I listen to the song, I get all choked up. And for the first time, I remember standing there and thinking to myself, I've never felt this way. I've never felt where what I did really had such a deep impact. And it was so meaningful to me that it caused me to many years later think back on that and say, there's something here. There is something here that's whispering at me that I'm not paying attention to. And so after 23 plus years in global corporate, where I was doing mainly global roles, regional roles, I reached a point where I said, I want to figure out what's the next chapter for myself. I wanted to figure out what's the arc of my story. I had a very successful corporate career, and something was telling me that that chapter is closing. I'd been there, done that. I had achieved what I wanted to achieve. It was now time for something different for me. And I think that was the question that was kind of nagging at me. What's next? What's this different thing? And I knew I wanted something that was more meaningful. I knew somehow deep down I had more to give. And that remembering that defining moment and that point in time where I stood there in front of everybody crying my eyes out and thinking, this is what I want. This is what I want every day to feel like. How I am making a difference in such a powerful, meaningful way to individuals. That was when I said, okay, there's something here. It's not in corporate, it's not marketing. It is something about human potential and human development. That's what my next chapter is. And so, yep, that began the start of the pivot.
Wow, I love that. Now, you've talked in the book about how you're not really a fan of the word purpose, that kind of feels a bit too big. Can you unpack that a little bit, and what would you prefer to say instead?
Sometimes, as coaches, we believe strongly in having very clear purpose because that's what drives us. That provides that inner motivation, right? But when we work with people and we start talking about, so what do you think your purpose is? I've seen people freeze at that word. And I would admit, when I was trying to figure out my next chapter, if you had asked me then what my purpose is, I would be, I don't know. I really don't know. I know what I like to do. I know what I enjoy doing. I know my strengths. I know kind of like, you chunk it down and all those bits and bobs underneath. But I don't know what my purpose is. I mean, it feels like I should be curing cancer. That's what purpose is all about. It's this really big, huge word that sometimes has, unfortunately, a bit of, I would say baggage attached to it because we think it needs to be something so profound. And I don't, I think by using that word, sometimes we can cause ourselves to overthink things. I like to you just use the word why, why do you want to do what you do? You know, why does it bring you joy? Right? So sometimes just chunk it down and finding your why, you know, it's not as scary and confronting, I think, as purpose.
Mm.
When I was trying to figure out my next chapter, I started asking myself the question of why don't I want to be in corporate anymore? Why do I want to start my own business? Why do I want to go into coaching? So sometimes as simple as why helps. And maybe that's a bit too simplistic, but just helping people understand the why behind what's driving them, I think makes it a little bit easier than trying to answer this huge question around what's your purpose in life.
Yeah. So we've got people listening who feel like they've lost that why or they've never known what it was to begin with, what's the first small step you'd suggest for them that would help them sort of reconnect with that lighthouse?
I know it sounds a bit counterintuitive, but I would say slow down in order to speed up. Sometimes, I mean, we're so conditioned in terms of just pushing ahead, pushing harder, striving harder. But this is really not about striving harder, working harder. I don't think you or anybody can work any harder than we already are. We've probably done our absolute best to squeeze every single minute second out of every day that we have. And if anything, I would say that most of us are exhausted and burnt out. So this is not about working harder or striving harder. Rather, I would say take a pause, take a beat, slow down a little bit, and focus on deepening your self awareness. I am a huge, firm believer of self awareness. And I think of self awareness as having many different levels. And it's the level 3 self awareness that I would love people to kind of aim towards. Level 1 self awareness for me is about some basic things which most of us know. What's your strengths? What's your weaknesses? What are the things that you consider as important? What do you value? It's fantastic. I think at the minimum, you need to get your head around that, right? Level 2 self-awareness is, I think, where it gets a little bit squirrely sometimes, which is, okay, what are some of your fears? What are your blind spots? What might be some of your limiting beliefs? But level 3 self-awareness is about, okay, how do you want to be seen? How do you want to be remembered? How do you want to show up as a leader? Is how you're actually perceived lining up with what you want it to be. And so for people searching for their lighthouse, I would say number one, start with self-awareness. And as you deepen your self-awareness, you get more clarity. And I talk about, if you think of a Venn diagram, there's clarity, conviction, and congruence. I think the first step is really getting clarity, really asking yourself the hard question. And it was interesting. I just finished a session with a client where we talked about what is it that you really want for yourself. If you could assume that you could get there, don't worry about how you get there. Just assume for now you could get there. What is it that you really want? Let's get clarity on that. But in order to get the clarity on it, you have to first really work on yourself. And that's about self-awareness. That's the first step.
That's such a great question. I love it. I really do. Now, when you talk about self-awareness for leaders, what does that show up like in the corporate context? Like if you saw a leader and go, that's a person who's really self-aware, what are you seeing?
Well, in the context, it's interesting because leaders can very often tell you, yep, here are my strengths. And yep, I know that these are the areas that I need to work on. Basic stuff. What I think a lot of leaders don't spend enough time thinking about is, how do I show up when I'm stressed? How do I then self-manage? I mean, most people can tell you, okay, when I'm stressed, this is how I tend, I get impatient. I start maybe snapping at people a little bit, or maybe I withdraw and I kind of go into my corner because I don't want to interact with people. I just want to deal with things on my own. But 9 times out of 10, that's very unproductive behaviors. So the follow-on question from a self-awareness standpoint is, what are you doing, or have you developed strategies? Are you first aware when you start to derail like that? And then B, what are you doing to interrupt yourself and say, okay, this is unproductive, it's not helping me. What should I be doing instead? Right. I think that's, to me, the second important step. But then what I also don't see leaders doing is, and this is where the word feedback has a lot of negative flack around it. People don't like feedback, but I'm always encouraging people to get feedback, because to me, feedback, it's like a gift. It's a gift to you, right? And of course, importantly, you have to get feedback from people that you trust and who are willing to give you honest feedback. But if you're a leader who has aspirations in terms of what you want to achieve and how you want to lead, then get feedback in terms of, is that how you're really showing up? It's one thing to say, I want to be an empathetic leader who supports my team and wants to develop them. Fantastic. Okay. Is that how you're showing up? Will your team say the same thing if I go and ask them? Right? Do you know what is it that your team will say? And in the book, I talk about how Gary Burnson, the CEO of Korn Ferry, he has this really interesting exercise, which I love, because from Korn Ferry's research, they know that 60% of leaders actually overstate their strengths and deficiencies. So they don't actually have a good handle in terms of what are their real strengths and deficiencies. And that's dangerous, because leaders who overstate their strengths are 6 times more likely to derail. So Gary Burnison did this really interesting exercise where he called all his team into a room. He gave them each a clicker. He went through a series of questions, and everybody anonymously then rated him across several dimensions that he wanted to get feedback on. And I think that was super brave, but so revealing. And I always say to leaders, I mean, I wonder what your team and your peers would say if I went to talk to them. Yeah.
And it's such an interesting reflective piece, isn't it? I loved what you were saying before about this catching yourself in the moment and doing something about it, because there's the behaviors of choice. And that's one of the things about it, is that we can all be driven by, fears and threats and all of the things that happen to humans, but it's how we respond to it that's important. And noticing yourself doing it and going, even though I feel like I want to sit in my office and shut the world out, I'm still going to show up and go out and do the thing, is a really important choice point, I think, for leaders. Now, you talk about high achieving women struggling with inner critics and so on. How do you coach people who are really in that space? Because it's really common for women to be really quite hard on themselves. So what's your coaching approach when you work with women?
That's an interesting question. And I think it's first helping them define, is this a lack of confidence because you're in a new situation? That's normal. I mean, that's human, right? Anybody who's in a new situation will have a little bit of, learning curve. So that's normal. So it's helping them kind of almost right size that wobble that they're feeling. In some cases, it might be something more prevalent, like imposter syndrome. And fully get it. I have imposter syndrome, something I've worked on for myself. But I think it's kind of helping them right size, what exactly are we dealing with here? Is it a natural learning curve? Is it something that is linked to competence? So you might not have the confidence, or you might have the self-doubt because you don't have the experience or the knowledge. So how can we get that experience and knowledge, right? Or is there something else going on that might be a little bit deeper? Like imposter syndrome, which is then going back to how you frame your level of confidence. How do you see yourself in terms of competence? That's more to do with limiting beliefs. So I think it's the first step is really kind of digging deeper to right size what exactly are we talking about here. And then the approach would be very different. But A lot of times I find with women, it is about dealing with the negative self-talk. There's a very interesting book called The Confidence Code. And you're nodding, so I'm I think that you read it. And they did some very interesting research, right? And in some ways, like it or not, women are hardwired to ruminate a little bit more. And that's okay, right? But then it's knowing that because we do ruminate a little bit more, what is the impact of that? And for some women, that rumination leads to a lot of internal churn. So it's noticing what you're saying to yourself, understanding what might be driving it. In some cases, making the choice then to reframe that internal self-talk. In other cases, that process of reframing the internal self-talk is not as simple because there is some deeper things going on to do with fears, beliefs, assumptions that we're making, stuff beneath the iceberg, would be the words that, we coaches use. And so it's kind of getting at that. But a lot of it with women, I think, is dealing with that internal self-talk.
It's a really big one, isn't it? Because we can be so harsh to ourselves. One of the things that I will say to clients who are struggling with something like this is I'll often ask them, would you say that to your best friend? And they'll say, of course I wouldn't say that. That they're horrified by the very idea. And it's like, well, why are you saying that to yourself?
Yeah.
It's, when you notice yourself doing it, stopping and going, why am I saying this to myself? Is it fair? Is it true? Is it adding value? Now, there's something you said in the book, focus on what only you can do. And that's really, really powerful advice. I love that. So how can leaders identify the work that really deserves their energy and attention?
I find that, one of the biggest shifts that's uncomfortable for leaders as they step up into a bigger role is letting go of doing stuff. And it's funny because it's almost as if the role now requires them to not do stuff. And when I say do stuff means hands-on, I'm going to go in here and solve the problem, right? Because that's not what their role is now. Their role is actually not to actually get the work done, but rather is to help pave the way so that their teams can get their work done. So I think when a leader steps into a bigger or a senior role, they have to really ask themselves, what is their role really about now? And a lot of times, particularly if they're in an executive role, it is not about getting the work done. I know it sounds strange, but that's really not what it's about. It's about helping their teams, getting the work done through other people. So one of the things that helps the leader figure out what is it that only they can do is they have to ask themselves within their job description, what is it that they can do it, or is it somebody that they can delegate it to? If it's a task that can be delegated, then clearly they should not be the one doing it, right? But if it is about managing diverse stakeholder viewpoints, for instance, and the complexity around that, then only they can do it, because that's not somebody that you send your direct report, even though your direct report is a very experienced and senior person to go and do. You will have to go and fight those battles in order to get the necessary resources for your team. So it's really looking at their remit and asking themselves, what is it that only they can do? They are the only person who can go and solve this problem for the team. Nobody else can. And I've seen leaders fall into a trap where they know that they are responsible for setting the strategy. And because they want to be collaborative and inclusive, they then call many team meetings in where they would try and collaborate towards a strategy. And I'm like, I'm not sure that that's what that's about, because only you can start to set what the strategy is for your organization. Now, you can collaborate to get inputs to that strategy and see what you may have missed in the thinking. But only you can decide what is the goal that we're working towards and what might be the 2 or 3 things that's going to get us there. Only you can start that process. You can't start that process by having 15 people in the room have a discussion and try and get there. Because this is not a it's not a process where you vote yourselves. Everybody has an equal say and you vote to determine what your strategy is.
Now, that requires making space for deep thinking. And a lot of leaders and executives are incredibly busy people. And that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges that I come across in coaching clients is, how do I find time to do the deep thinking part? So what have you found to be most effective for people in carving out that time to really provide and also protect the space?
I know it sounds simple, but it is really about controlling your calendar. Because either you control your calendar or the calendar controls you, right? And I always say to leaders I work with, it's almost like you're fixing a meeting with yourself, right? So go into your calendar and you decide how much time you need each week to really sit down and do some deep thinking. Because again, this is work that only you can do. Nobody can do the deep thinking for you when it comes to strategy or the right organization that you need in order to deliver the strategy, right? So that might be an hour a week, it might be 2 hours a week, whatever it is. Figure out how much time you need. Go in, block out your calendar, hold it as sacred. Nobody touches it. That's number one. But number two, equally, have the discipline when you have that time. This is not the time for you to clear the 100 emails that's in your inbox, which often, as I'm sure you and I have seen, they do block out the time, but then they use it to catch up on all of the other fires that are happening within the organization. So it does. I think this is where I always say it starts with clarity of your intention. So, what is your intention here? If your intention is you want to spend some time thinking about certain critical business issues, okay, that's clear. That's your intention, right? The how to do it is discipline and commitment, lining up your actions with your intentions. Underneath that could be working on how comfortable are you in terms of saying no? How comfortable are you in terms of truly letting go and not getting into the weeds? How much do you actually trust your team? And how clear have you been in terms of setting expectations with them when they should come to you if things were to derail? Because a lot of times leaders jump in because they either haven't been clear with their expectations or they're afraid that things will fall off, the wheels will fall off the bus and they'll get blamed.
Interesting, isn't it? Now, I picked up elements of your model in that too, that clarity, conviction, and congruence. So can you talk to us a little bit more about that? Just unpack it for us a bit.
It's a model that you can use it across so many things, but it really does start with clarity in terms of what is it that you really want here? And that question can cut across so many things, right? What is it that you want, whether it's in terms of your career goal? What is it that you want for your life? I like the term a life well lived. And it could be clarity in terms of what does that look like for you? Because what it looks like for you could be very different from what it looks like for me, and that's fine. right? But it's your life. Only you can decide what you want it to be. So it's getting clarity on that. What's important to you? And all of us, there are certain core things that might remain as important to us. Those are our core values. But there might be some values that shift over time because all of us go through different life stages. I know for me, what's important to me now and my values is so different from when I was in my 30s and building my career. Very different. There might be some core values that are the same, but there's a bunch that's changed. So getting really super clear on that, and that's the lighthouse. That's the little white lighthouse that I keep on my desk as my reminder. And then number 2 is conviction, right? You have clarity now, but do you have the conviction to live and lead that way? If you have clarity in terms of how you want to lead, and part of being a good leader is really having inclusive leadership, then do you have the conviction to then implement certain ways that you run your team such that you are talking less and listening more, asking more questions because you want to be more inclusive? Do you have the courage and the conviction to make hard decisions in your career? If you are truly convinced that you want to teach instead of be a corporate leader, then what are you doing? And that's the congruence part. What are the small steps you're taking to make those bold moves, to move towards being a lecturer instead of a corporate leader?
It's lovely. So I imagine for you, like it has for me, certainly my definition of leadership has evolved a lot since I left my corporate role. How's that worked for you? If you sort of look at what you would have defined leadership at like when you were in corporate and how you define it today, what's the difference?
I love that question because so much has changed. Um, I think there are two key differences, and it's differences that leaders must learn to embrace more comfortably right now. I think the first key difference is not knowing what the answer is, and not just not knowing, but frankly be comfortable with maybe there isn't a clear answer and a right answer right now. So I think the one big difference in leadership is the willingness to embrace the ambiguity and the uncertainty that's coming at us all the time now.
Mm.
I think as a leader, we've always had to deal with some level of uncertainty and ambiguity. But the level of uncertainty and ambiguity has really magnified to the point right now where any leader who feels that they have the answer is probably barking up the wrong tree. You may have a answer now, but just being willing to embrace risk and learn as you go along, that's one big part of it. I think the second big part then is how do you lead an organization then where you're demonstrating enough confidence in the direction that you're taking and you're bringing them along at the same time, but at the same time also help them understand that zigging and zagging is going to be how life is going to be for the foreseeable future. As human beings, we don't deal with uncertainty very well, right? Because it threatens our very core desire for security. So the level of uncertainty that's out there right now, I think leaders are constantly walking this tension between I have to demonstrate that I know what I'm doing, that I have some answers, and that you should have confidence in me. But at the same time, helping the organization understand and live through that uncertainty as well, and know that it's okay. It's okay. We zig today and zag tomorrow. but overall, we kind of are clear with what is it as a company, why we exist.
Mm.
And it may take, like in sailing, why you exist is there, but then you don't go there in a straight line. You tack your way there if you're going upwind, right? There's a lot of zigs and zags, right? And it's okay. I think that has changed quite a bit from when you and I perhaps were in corporate. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. It's a very different world. I left corporate nearly 14 years ago now, and it's a very different world. Back then, it was a lot. The pace was a bit slower. I mean, it still felt frantic at the time, but now you look back on it and go, that was nothing. And like you said, the ambiguity is ramped up, the uncertainty. Like you said, we're just tacking. We're tacking, backwards and forwards, figuring out we're still heading in the right direction, but we just don't know how we're going to get there. And it's a big thing, like you mentioned, for humans because of our need for security and to know that we're safe and that things are going to be okay. And as leaders, we can't promise that to people anymore.
Yeah, yeah. And yet at the same time, what's interesting is, a big part of, especially when you're a senior leader, is executive presence,
Mm.
right? And a big part of executive presence is having that level of composure and credibility so that people feel confident in your leadership. So on the one hand, inside, you might be freaking out going, I have no idea what we're doing. We're taking a punt in terms of this direction, right?
Mm.
And so how do you communicate and bring everybody else along in that journey, balancing that tension, which is, we are having a direction, but it's a punt, and so we might have to zag later on, right? And I think that's a incredible balancing act that all leaders have to do right now. Yeah,
It's a big ask, isn't it? That's being able to keep your composure because other people's emotional state depends on how you show up. Because your
exactly.
emotions as a leader are very contagious, and other people will pick up if you're feeling insecure or uncertain about something. And you've got to show up and be composed and secure and give them that sense that it's going to
Yeah.
be okay, even though we don't know which way we're going to tack next. It's going to be okay. We're getting there in the end. It's this big, big ask for people. It really is. I mean, the complexity of leadership is really accelerated.
It's accelerated beyond belief. And what I always say to people I work with is if you're waiting for things to go back to the way it was, it's never going to happen. I'm sorry, it ain't going to happen. Right. So if it's not going to happen, then what are you going to do to be able to thrive in this kind of situation? And, one of the things that I'm such a firm believer on is constant growth and development. I am a huge, huge believer of continuing to grow and develop yourself because as human beings, we have such tremendous capacity to continue evolving who we are, how we show up. And I think sometimes we have this mistaken belief that, we kind of grow and develop. And once we reach a certain stage, we're adults now, we're in the working world, we are fully baked. Right? The cake is fully baked. And yeah, we can continue to grow our skills. And yes, we must have a growth mindset. But, for all intents and purposes, we're fully baked. But we're not. We're not fully baked. And again, it goes back to self-awareness, right? Continue to work on yourselves. Ask yourself these questions. And given the amount of complexity and ambiguity out there, if we continue to develop ourselves, then we're able to expand our own mindset and how we see things such that we can be more adaptable, we can be more flexible. When the next change or uncertainty hits us, we're not so thrown by that because we know how we're looking at things and we can look at it and say, okay, fine, we'll roll with the punches, right? We'll get through this. And it just helps us lead with a lot more ease. Yeah. So I'm like constantly talking to people about what's your growth edge? Where's the edge where you start to now feel really uncomfortable? You're starting to really go outside your comfort zone. Okay, that's your growth edge. That's what we're going to work on.
I love that so much because we can't, if we fall back into feeling comfortable, we're not growing, we're just complacent, we're sitting there, we're stagnant. I was laughing a bit about your idea of the cake being, we're not baked yet, because I just had this vision pop into my head. I've got twin grandsons who are 2.5, and they like to help bake. And their contribution to baking is sitting on the floor smashing eggs. And I was kind of thinking, you're sort of talking about, the cakes, but, people think you're fully baked. And I'm thinking a lot of leaders would be sitting there going, God, I'm just sitting on the floor smashing eggs. I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I totally get that. So when you think about the leaders of today, the leaders maybe ones you work with or leaders you've seen or observed, what do the ones that you really admire have in common?
Good question. A couple of different things. I love leaders who, and I know that this word sometimes people balk at it, but leaders who show up authentically as themselves. And I read an article a long time ago, which was a fantastic Harvard Business Review article. When we talk about authentic leadership, it doesn't mean that we show up and bear every single bit of our soul to people. That's not what it means, right? But leaders who are authentic are clear about what their values are. They are clear in terms of how they want to make a difference. Because they are comfortable in their authenticity, they also know when being a little bit more vulnerable is a good thing. And they know how to leverage that authenticity to build a strong sense of connection with their team. Because at the end of the day, we don't leave companies, we leave leaders. Right? And I can tell you throughout my corporate career, I can name 2 leaders, I think, out of, I don't know how many I worked with, probably a dozen. I can name 2 very clearly in my mind that I would go above and beyond for, without question, right? And that's because I respect them. I know who they are. They have shown up authentically as a human being, right? And that meant a lot to me. And they interacted with me very authentically as well. So I truly admire that about them. I also very much admire leaders who, how would I say this? It's not about walking the talk, but it's about having the courage to have the hard conversations. I admire leaders who have the courage to have difficult conversations with team members when it comes to performance, when it comes from the right place. And the right place is not doing anybody any favors by giving soft feedback. It's not good for the business, but it's also not good for the individual. And the worst case scenario is you have somebody who's not performing in their job, but you're soft peddling the feedback. And maybe 2 years later, you might have to then terminate them from their position. I mean, that is like the worst thing ever, right? But it's not an easy conversation to have, right? It's not an easy conversation to have with someone where you might have to say, perhaps this is not the best fit for you, but let's work together to figure out what's a better fit for you in terms of your strengths. And hopefully we can find something within the company. But if not, then how can I help you find something that's a better fit outside? And I really admire leaders who have the courage to lean into those kind of difficult conversations, because it's not about them, it's not about the business, but it's about the person who is working with them and helping that individual live their best life. right? And I don't see, unfortunately, a lot of leaders who are comfortable with that because it's a
It's
hard
tricky.
conversation.
Yeah, I always talk about it in terms of showing up with compassion, with clarity, and with courage. Because you need to be compassionate, you need to be clear, but you also need to have the courage to have the conversation to start with, because it's really hard. We're wired as humans to preserve the status quo, to make people feel comfortable, because we're wired to connect with people. And when we have to disconnect with somebody and, push them out of our circle, it's a really hard thing to do.
Yeah,
Unless the person's absolutely transgressed in a way that we can't tolerate, we
yeah,
sort of do tend to brush over a bit and go, they'll get better,
yeah,
and you give them feedback which is a bit wishy-washy. And when it push comes to shove and they do have to go, the person's often stunned. They have no idea that they were performing poorly.
yeah. I mean, they've
They
been
often
completely
say, no one
blindsided.
told me. Mm,
Yeah, they've been completely blindsided. So I really admire and respect leaders who have the courage to do that,
mm,
and I've probably seen it a few times,
mm,
in my life. But I unfortunately have seen more of the other examples,
mm.
right?
Yeah, which is unfortunate.
Yeah,
And it's, I mean, my background is in human resources for many years. And one of the difficult things that we often used to get involved in was managers coming to us and saying, I need to exit somebody, they need to go, they're performing poorly. And of course, the first question we ask is, can we look at their performance reviews? And the performance reviews will be glowing. And
yeah,
the manager will say they've been underperforming for 3 years, yet all of the performance reviews say they're doing a great job. And so then you've got to start from scratch and go, okay, this is, so far the person's been told they're doing an amazing job. We need to start right at the very beginning of the process, and we're going to work through it. And it's going to take time.
yeah. I mean, I truly dislike the performance improvement process, the PIP process, because honestly, by the time you've gotten to that point, it's a little bit too late.
Yeah. And that's what it is, performance improvement processes. It's quite rare that somebody bounces back from that. Quite
Yeah,
often, it's usually they're on the way out the door and it's just the formality of moving them on.
exactly. Yeah. And can you
Very.
imagine the poor person who feels now that they're under the gun with a ticking clock,
Mm,
that they have to fix something that's, pretty major probably, but they have, I don't know, 3 months to do it.
mm. It's brutal sometimes. And that's the thing, is that because we're not in organizations good at doing these things, we end up putting processes around it to make it happen. It's one of the things, like, I'm not a fan of performance reviews at all in general, just because it's so formalized, and we should be talking to people all the time about what's going on, not
Yeah.
saving it up and doing a 6-month performance review. But as an HR professional, putting my hat on from years ago, I have to say, well, we had to do it that way because otherwise managers won't do it at all.
Yeah, they won't do it at all. Exactly. But I also remember, I mean, when it's time for performance review season, I mean, you probably have 15 to write. So can you imagine the amount of robustness that goes into that process? Probably not so good, right? Because at that
Yeah,
time you're under a pump, you have to finish all these 15 by a certain amount of time.
yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, I sort of cringe at it now. I look back on it and go, it's just not a great way of managing people, but it's probably the best we can do at the moment until we sort of evolve into the type of leadership that you're talking about. So when you think about your younger self and you're climbing that corporate ladder and doing everything that you thought was going to be a glittering career for you, what advice would you give her?
I would say, I kind of go back to one consistent message, which is be clear in terms of what's important to you. And don't be afraid to chart your own path. I have, I've been guilty of this where I have lived a life and had a career driven by what I think I should be doing, right? All of us have, right? But at some point, you have to decide what is it that you want for yourselves. And I know that that doesn't mean it's easy, right? But at least once you're clear what is it that you want versus should be doing, start putting a plan in place. It might take you a year to get there. It might take you 5 years. It might take you 10 years to get there, but it'll be worth it, right? And I sometimes say to myself, oh, gee, I wish I had found this next chapter of mine sooner. I don't know. I mean, I like to think that I am a better coach today because of my 24 years of corporate experience. Um, I know that halfway through corporate, I had a little whisper in my mind, hmm, maybe you should go and explore this instead. And I actually talked to several individuals exploring something else that had to do with human development and people development. But I reverted back to what I think I should be doing.
So many of us do that, don't we?
Yeah.
It's because the should is easier. It's not, like you said, leaning into that growth point, leaning into the uncomfortableness
Yeah.
because it becomes, even though corporate life isn't easy, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that it is, but it's familiar.
It's familiar and yeah, it's familiar and it's easy in the sense that you're being told what to do,
Yeah,
what
and
you
you get
should be
paid.
doing.
You get
Yeah.
paid every fortnight or every
Yeah,
month. You show up and you get
exactly.
a paycheck, and
Exactly.
you strike out on your own, and all of a sudden it's all up to you, and you've got to figure out for yourself where you're going and how you're going to get there and where the money's coming from. And it's you look at it and look at entrepreneurship and go, it's actually probably easier in corporate, but then you get that, like you talked about, that growth point, that edge where you're challenging yourself and you're being uncomfortable and you're growing so much.
And honestly, if I had one wish, it would be, I wish that leaders would put their needs and figure out what is it that they need to develop sooner in terms of their reflection. Because what I want is for more leaders, particularly female leaders, to stay in corporate. Because we need more gender diversity in the senior levels. I think it's good for the company, it's good for the business. But a lot of women are walking away because they find that they can't lead the way they want to and live the life that they want, that the sacrifices are too much. And I wonder whether if there was work done sooner with them, that path to having them live the life that they want and have the career that they want in corporate, because a lot of them have worked hard to get to where they are, that they could stay. Because wouldn't that be wonderful for the world in general and for women as well,
Absolutely.
right? If we
Yeah.
could have that balance that they're looking for, or the integrated life rather that they're looking for, right? And still be able to contribute with all the experience and the skills that they've built up over the 25 years that they were in corporate.
Mm.
That's my one wish, and if we could help organizations do that, I think we'll all be better off for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's probably all we've got time for. I mean, I could talk to you for hours about you. We're talking the same language. We could just go on and on, but need to pull it up. The book, we'll put links to the book below the video. I mean, not just your story, but the stories of other women in it are very, very powerful. It's a great read. So how can people get in touch with you and learn more about what you do at Spring Forward Australia?
The best way is frankly through LinkedIn. So connecting with me through LinkedIn is the best way. If they would like to buy the book, I know that you'll share the link on Amazon. They also have the option if they want to download just my chapter, because it is 12 stories, 12 amazing stories, some very interesting ones. I'm sure that you've read yourself also, Ross. And they can download my chapter from my website as well. And I think, Ross, you'll share that link as well.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Carol. That's been an absolute joy to talk to you. Like I said, we're talking the same language. I'm nodding all the way through because what you say just resonates so much and it aligns with all the things that I do as well. So it's fabulous to talk to somebody else who's on the same page. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today.
Thank you, Ross. I enjoyed our chat as well. Thank you.
Wonderful.